National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
2024 is here already. As the new year begins, the National Catholic Register takes a moment to reflect on the notable departures of 2023 and our top stories, with Register Editor-in-Chief Shannon Mullen. Then Senior Editor Jonathan Leidl joins us from Rome to discuss Fiducia Supplicans, the Vatican's document on blessings, and how 2023 is likely to impact Pope Francis's legacy. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, and your host here on Register Radio. I'm joined by my co-host Matthew Bunson, who is EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. Shannon Mullen has now been Editor-in-Chief of the Register for about a year. So we're talking about stories, this segment, that have been done under his tenure. These are all points of coverage under his very solid direction. Shannon, I can't believe it's been a year, but it has been a very busy year for you.
It has. We've crammed in 2 years' worth of news in 1 year. So.
Absolutely. We sure have. And you were still hands-on with Catholic News Agency during this year. So it probably feels really good that we can say now you're pretty much exclusively focused on the Register. Still, of course, doing some CNA Rome coverage, but we're super happy to have you focused on the Register. But what I did want to kind of bring up is the news of this year, and probably one of the more intense moments for you might have been the several weeks that you spent in Rome for the Vatican Synod on Synodality, huh?
It was. It was it was both intense, and maybe Matthew would concur with this, sometimes a little frustrating, yes. and maybe sometimes a little dull, but it was all that wrapped into a month that was quite an experience.
Well, we'll have another one in 24, so it's something I don't know if it's something to look forward to, but anyway, that'll be coming up again later this year. In this segment, I'd really like to focus on some of the more unique stories that the Register covered this year, and we knew by the year's end they were emerging as top stories because readers liked them, and the numbers told us that. But every year, for many, many years, the Register in the last edition of the year, this year that was December 31st, 2023, our print edition, we do photo essays, basically year in review with a bit of text, but a lot of photos to just kind of highlight the year. How does the Register select that content? How did it select that content this year, Shannon?
Yeah, it was funny. The cover was actually a photo that came in late in the year in November at the Pope's General Audience on Wednesdays. There was just this beautiful photo taken of the Pope with 5 nuns sort of leaning over, and they're all smiling, and I don't know what they're talking about, but they're very happy. And it was just a nice image that I used my editorial executive powers to put that on the front, because it was a rough year in many ways, and that was it just had a great cheery tone to it that we liked. But I mean, how we look at these things is looking for images that you can look at and you understand right away what the action is. You know, one of them, for example, was a photo taken of Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster, the foundress of the Benedictine Abbey in Gower, Missouri, and whose body was exhumed during this past year. One of the big stories of the year in the United States was found to be surprisingly intact, in very good condition, even though she had died some years ago. And that was a big story and just a very compelling image. There's another one of Bishop Strickland kneeling, leading the rosary outside the U.S. Bishop's Assembly in Baltimore this past November. Another big story, what happened to him. Yeah, we have a lot of fun choosing the images and telling stories that way.
Yeah, and this year you did something unique. I was very happy to see it when I was proofing the paper, and it was my favorite story. So you had Register writers reflect on their best work of 2023. It was a great addition, and some of my favorite stories ended up in that. One Loretta Brown did was Mom and Babies on Campus, and this was initiative that some universities are doing to just facilitate mothers on campus, and that was really a great story and something worth highlighting. So I'm glad you did that special edition. One of the things that again you did in this edition that was a little different from the way it was done in the past was including fact boxes of the Register's top stories. And as I mentioned, these were stories that we knew by the end of the year were sort of readers' selections. This is what our traffic told us was most interesting to our readers. That was Register content, because the Register does run a lot of CNA content, and some of those were our top stories of the year. But there were several things that were highlighted here that are worth mentioning. I'm gonna talk about one of them. You mentioned that image that was on the cover, the beautiful image of the 5 nuns, and I think it was a fitting image. Although you said, hey, it's a cheerful image, and that's kind of why you selected it. It was an image of hope, and it's really beautiful. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing these smiling nuns of every age, really, because it's got a wide variety of ages in the picture. But it could definitely be said that this was a year that women had a new place in the church with the participation in the synod. And I think one of our top stories on, I think, the Vatican section was related to a woman who was a lay participant in the synod. I think the title of that story is Synod on Synodality, Laywoman's Speech Opposing Women's Ordination Draws Big Ovation, Standing Ovation. That was a great story that our readers loved, and I think, Shannon, both you and I thought it was well worth inclusion in this year-end.
Yeah, I'm glad that one made it to the top 5, really, of our most viewed stories. This is a story that focused on an Australian delegate, philosopher, theologian, Renee Kohler-Ryan, who was really emerged as, for us, I think, one of the stars, one of the bright spots of the Synod on Synodality Assembly in October. And one of the things that happened, we didn't have access to what was going on in the Synod Hall, but, people do talk, and we heard about a intervention or a short speech that one of the delegates gave, and it turned out to be Professor Kohler-Ryan. And one of the things she was kind of talking about was pushing back on this attempt to what she called clericalize the laity, mm-hmm. and really pushing the issue of women's ordination to the diaconate or to women priests issue, something that the secular media at the Vatican was really pressing in their the daily media briefing. And she said that was a distraction from what women want to talk about and need to talk about. And she was commenting about how, hey, what about motherhood? That was barely mentioned in the sort of planning document for the Synod Assembly. And she got a standing ovation, which was pretty neat. And I think it resonated with a lot of readers too.
Yeah, absolutely. Another story that I think was just really positive, and I'll only mention it because I want to move on to a few other things, but it made it into our top 5 for Nation. Again, it's a positive story. St. Charles Borromeo Church creates an environment which makes you think of the Eucharist. And this was a story about a brand new church in the Diocese of Fresno. And it's great that our readers were so interested in a brand new church, right? And that there is this brand new church, I think with 14,000 people, just a really big new church. And that's hopeful news. That's positive news. It's the kind of news that the Register wants to cover, even in the midst of some of the tough stuff that we do have to cover. Speaking of tough stuff that we have to cover, notable deaths is always something that we try to pay attention to. We include a whole list of those in this print edition. And this year, Matthew, there were some really big ones. Obviously, at the end of 22 was the death of Benedict, so we were just digesting that when Cardinal George Pell died January 10th. Right. So we lost two giants right there. But who else should we note?
Well, that's right. This is a year of a number of unfortunate deaths. We think, for example, of Bishop David O'Connell, the auxiliary bishop in Los Angeles, who was killed. We can think as well of what the Vatican put out, a list of 20 Catholic missionaries who were killed just this last year. That's an increase a little bit from 18 from the year before. And that includes 9 missionaries who were killed in Africa. Of course, we can't talk about the loss of Christian lives without thinking of the hundreds who have been killed just this last year in Nigeria at the hands of radical Muslims. We can think as well of the missionaries, 6 of them killed in the Americas in 2023. Most of those taking place in either Mexico or the United States. There are also 4 lay people who were killed in Asia over the last year. So we hold them in our hearts. And then there were others who passed. I think of Monsignor Frank McGrath, who is a well-known chaplain at Ave Maria School of Law, as well as one of the great friends. I know we were talking about this a little while ago, Jeanette. Mother Elvira Petrozzi, the founder of the Comunità Cenacola in Italy, who died at the age of 86. A number of cardinals passed as well. So this was a year of passings, but notable ones.
Absolutely. And you know, it's so good of you to mention the persecuted Christians. I mean, we just cannot forget them. They may not strike us as like the notable deaths the way these lists come out, but it's a huge impact to see how many people are really martyred, oftentimes in church. You know, some of these tragedies have happened while people worshiped. So it's very good. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Shannon, there's a great story that is really worth noting as we kind of draw to a conclusion here, because it's something so ordinary, but our readers loved it, and it's something that we'll have to kind of think about how to outdo it this year. And this is the story about St. Patrick's Day, which fell during Friday of Lent, and Mac McDonald did a great piece that our audience just ate up.
Yes, the meat of the matter, one of my favorite stories and headlines, actually. So, yes, Matt, among his many other gifts, is sort of our statistician on staff, and he surveyed every diocese in the United States and discovered that 72.6% of U.S. dioceses were giving some sort of dispensation for St. Patrick's Day falling on a Lenten Friday. So 93 dioceses, he found out, were giving, hey, no strings attached. You know, it's just a free day. 34 dioceses that were giving some sort of commutation. So you can eat meat, but go to Mass or pray the Rosary or pray the St. Patrick's breastplate prayer. So it was a great piece. Not only that, but it had an interactive map by CNA's Jonah McEwen, and it was in the colors of the Irish flag. You could click on a state, your diocese, and find out what the rules were. It was just a great piece.
Well, we'll close on that one. I think the Register, that piece was about where fasting was dispensed with, but I think recently we've had some conversations about how important it is to bring back fasting, whether it's on Friday or other important days, because our church and our world needs prayer and fasting, and now's a great moment to start thinking about how we incorporate that back into our lives. But thank you very much for your work at the Register, and we will be turning to the Vatican and how 2023 added to Pope Francis's legacy when we come back. This is Register Radio on EWTN. Stay tuned for more.
If you need your news on the go, read the Register online. But if you want to take your time and savor the stories, then subscribe to the National Catholic Register's print edition. And with award-winning Catholic journalism that goes beyond what you'll find from any secular news service, you'll get the real story behind the events that unfold over the course of the year. Try the Register for free today and get it delivered to your home, office, or parish. Join the Catholics who depend on the Register for its faithful and courageous reporting. Get 6 issues free today online at ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code radio. That's ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code radio. The National Catholic Register. Read faithfully.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency. I'm joined by my co-host, Matthew Bunson, here on Register Radio. And we're doing a year in review of 2023, and now we turn to the Vatican. So as I said, every year we take a look at the top stories of the past year. We look at what the readers thought were the top stories, as well as what our editors and writers thought. And Jonathan Leidl, who joins us right now from Rome, did the Vatican review for the December 31st, 2023 edition. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to Register Radio again.
Jeanette, Matthew, good to be with you.
So this year, Jonathan, we titled that essay that you wrote, the photo essay, Vatican 2023, Pope Francis Builds His Legacy. And so it's interesting because we did celebrate in this year his 10th anniversary, but really there were many things in this year. So we reflected a lot on his legacy. That was March, right? His 10th anniversary. But in the course of this year, there were really some defining moments in the Vatican. What would you say those are? And yes, I can name some that the readers thought, but what were the stories that you would say were the defining moments of the year?
Yeah, I think the overarching theme for Pope Francis and the Vatican was Francis securing his vision of the Church, possibly even beyond his own papacy, and even amidst signs of declining health. So I think probably the 3 biggest events or developments to highlight in that vein was the selection of then Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez, Pope Francis's longtime ghostwriter, theological advisor, a fellow Argentinian, to the position of prefect of the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith. So this was the Pope taking kind of the guy who's been behind the scenes, helping to develop the Pope's theological vision and really bringing him front and center and placing him in a great position of prominence in the Vatican. Cardinal Fernandez, at this point in time, is only 61 years old, so a significant catapulting of this previously, somewhat unknown, or at least not in the limelight figure, to the very heart of the Church's doctrine and teaching office. Related to that, Pope Francis made Cardinal Fernandez and 20 other prelates, he gave them the red hat. He made them cardinals at a consistory in September. And this was significant because it swelled the ranks of cardinal electors, right? Those who are going to be eligible to pick the next pope in the event of a conclave, to currently 137, which is higher than ever before. And if we look at those numbers, Pope Francis has now picked over 70% of the cardinal electors. So the thought being there that this is perhaps an effort of Pope Francis to put in place cardinals who might be more likely to pick a successor to him kind of in his same mold. And then finally, I think another huge event from the year was the Synod on Synodality Assembly in October in the Vatican. Of course, the Synod on Synodality was a process started by Pope Francis back in 2021, but really this Vatican Assembly, which will have a second part in 2024, is the culmination of it. And synodality, this idea of journeying together, this idea of a listening church, has really been a hallmark of Pope Francis's throughout that 10-year pontificate. And this Synod on Synodality and the final report it produces, and whatever direction Pope Francis decides to take that when that happens, is really the kind of primary means of putting that into action. So those were those three legacy sort of building initiatives of Pope Francis in 2023. And as I mentioned, it came as signs that his health, was continuing to show signs of decline. Pope Francis turned 87 during the past year in December. He had a couple of serious bouts of bronchitis, one back in March and another in November into December. And he also had abdominal surgery in the middle of the year as well. So an interesting dynamic on the one sense. Perhaps Pope Francis wondering how much longer he'll be with us, but then also taking steps to possibly secure his vision beyond his own tenure.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned his health, but even with signs of poor health, he visited Congo, South Sudan, Hungary, Mongolia, France, Portugal for World Youth Day. It's Mongolia. It was the first time any pope had ever visited Mongolia. So yeah. He really had an amazing year in terms of what he accomplished in 1 year. Shannon made a joke that, we covered 2 years worth of news in 1 year at the beginning of this show, and I think the Pope really packed it in this year. So right at the end of the year, though, really as we were preparing this print edition, the one that came out December 31st, we, just a few days before, got the document, Fiducia Supplicans, which is the document on blessings, and we had to scramble to get it into the edition even. But how would you say, Jonathan, that impacts Pope Francis's legacy?
Yeah, well, this guidance on blessings, the possibility of blessing of same-sex couples and those in irregular situations. Pope Francis, he kind of saved it till the end, right before Christmas. But this was probably, I would say, the biggest event of the year, arguably. And I think to the point you're making, Jeanette, it has a big impact on the legacy that Pope Francis very well might leave behind. And I think a big reason for that is that this document, whatever its intentions were, and whatever the correct reading of it might be, it's generated an immense amount of controversy and confusion, and even disunity within the church. You have basically mutually exclusive interpretations from bishops in countries throughout Africa and Eastern Europe compared to their counterparts, perhaps especially in Germany. So it's really it's interesting because there's other things we mentioned, synodality, for instance. You talked about the Pope's visits. You mentioned countries like Mongolia with 10,000 Catholics, right? Or some of these other places in Africa that the Pope visited, right? He's always been thought of as a Pope of the peripheries. And I think the thought is this might complicate some of those other dimensions of the Pope's legacy. If we talk about synodality, Fiducia Supplicans was a text from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith that apparently relied on very little consultation with bishops and other key advisors, actually, throughout the world before it was published, right? And we even think back to the Synod on Synodality. We know that topics related to the Church's pastoral care of people with same-sex attraction came up. We know that there was significant pushback from African participants
Right.
from Eastern Europe, even in the term LGBTQ plus being included, and certainly in any kind of step that might seem to condone or even give the slightest indication that same-sex relationships were permissible. And it's to some extent, I think people wonder if that kind of input at the Synod on Synodality was lost in the shuffle or wasn't factored in to Fiducia Supplicans, at least the way it's implemented and promoted. So I think synodality, there's a question of will Fiducia Supplicans and perhaps the disunity that it's fostered, will that overshadow synodality? On the question of peripheries, right? This is something that is largely being celebrated in those traditional, now post-Christian centers of power in Germany, in Austria, some bishops in France, Belgium. But it's something that's been very upsetting to those bishops and those Catholics, right, on those geographic peripheries in the developing South, in Africa, also increasingly in South America as well. So I think it complicates the legacy. It certainly doesn't necessarily undermine the Pope's emphasis on synodality or the peripheries, but it complicates it. And then one final thought maybe on the legacy. We mentioned the conclave, right? We mentioned how the Pope made an unprecedented move to swell the ranks of cardinal electors to 137 people. I think a move like Fiducia Supplicans perhaps makes it increasingly less likely that the successor to Pope Francis will share some of his priorities in terms of church reform and pushing for some of these pastoral openings that some might say call into question church unity, church stability, and the church's even clarity about doctrine, right? So I think that's something to look ahead to, the implications and the impact of Fiducia Supplicans on even who the next pope might be. Whenever
Absolutely.
that conclave,
Right.
obviously we don't know when that will happen, right?
Obviously. But as you said, what we should be watching this year is synodality. And that's something we will continue to see teased out, and then we'll meet again. In October, the Synod will meet again, and that's something to keep a close eye on as the course of this year. Jonathan, thanks for your reporting.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks for joining us here on Register Radio on EWTN. For Matthew Bunson and our producer, Jeff Burson, who today is his last show, and we are truly grateful. I am Jeanette DeMello, and I ask until next week, may God bless you.